Good morning. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. This is our first in-person meeting since October 20. No, not October, April of 20. And it's great to see you all. Hopefully you've had a good summer, traveling, etc. The weather's been a little bit of an issue for whatever reason. So we have we'll start our agenda with approval of the minutes. July 7th minutes.
I'll make a motion.
But no questions, corrections, nothing. Thank you. Okay, next reports. Health Department, Jen Austin, Director.
How do you want to do this?
Whatever you would like to. Usually. Front and center, number one.
Okie dokie. So you all got my written report yesterday. The vaccination data is 2 weeks behind with the state. So specifically to 0 to 4, that number will go up. We did 16 yesterday. We did another dozen last week with that. But overall, and sadly, that number is in the top 5, that 23.69% in the state, because it's very, very low. The Omicron specific booster comes out next week. The meetings are today and tomorrow. The CDC was set the guidelines. We've already pre-ordered vaccine. There is limited supply the first couple of weeks, but we ordered what we could. So the link that goes out tonight in my weekly out call that gets posted on the website, I'm encouraging those that wanted to sign up, because it will be approved and we'll have the vaccine either Tuesday or Wednesday in time for the Thursday clinic. Now the criteria that's tentative, I'll say, is 12 and over for the Omicron specific, and it has to be at least 2 months since your last dose, which shouldn't be an issue. So the 5 to 11 are not in that age group. The 5 to 11 are still getting the boosters from the original. Now, as of yesterday, Pfizer and Moderna boosters are no longer approved for 12 and up of that old formula. So, but you could still use it as first and second dose for the primary series. So Shannon is calling the people we had signed up today to tell them the 5 to 11-year-olds can still come, but those 12 and up can't get that booster anymore.
Just push bivalent. Are we getting Pfizer and Moderna?
Yes.
Hold on, Annie. To be back here at 9.
It's still the 2 weeks they recommend you waiting.
After you got COVID.
Yes. Now, one of the major updates, the DPH, there was a law passed that as of July 1st, all vaccinations now must be entered into CT Wiz to have one immunization record, which this is huge because pediatricians have always done it. So our kids that are in high school, you have their whole record. But a lot of these, primary care providers weren't doing that. So now everything, including flu, COVID, will be, so we made the transition over on August 5th. We're all set up and enrolled through the CVP program, which is the Connecticut Vaccine Program through the State Health Department. We're also going to be receiving free flu vaccine and any other childhood immunization vaccine. It's like 3 pages long of what we can get. So I've already been talking to Janet and Brian Lutsey about doing flu clinics in the school in October. Janet's trying to nail down some dates for me. And then we'll also be doing obviously booster clinics for the teachers of the new Omicron specific. And if it's approved for 12 and up as well. So that's good because we need to have one place for the immunization records.
So the VAMS data is all automatically.
It's all been transferred over and VAMS has been zeroed out. So all our inventory is moved over and there's no longer access to VAMS. But this will also give us a real picture of what the flu vaccination rates are, what all the other different vaccination rates are, because it wasn't going to a central database. So you have no idea. You know you got the flu vaccine from your primary care provider, but nobody else knew. You know, so that's great. Case-wise, right now, we're at 15 this week. We had 14 last week. That's normal for this time of year. If you look back at the charts of everything. Testing has been down a little bit, and if you see that we had a lot of the 10 to 19, that's because a lot of camps required it in July and boarding schools and such. And just, I put in charts in there about the variant that's circulating the most right now, and that's BA.5. So the new booster hopefully will help with cases in November and December, where we typically get annihilated. All the environmental health numbers are there. We're still very busy with building permits, septic, et cetera, et cetera. 2 new lead cases of elevated blood lead levels in children. And when that new level goes into play, which is going to be 3.5, we'll have even more cases because that state law was also passed. So every time the legislature puts pen to paper, it becomes more work for local health. The FEP update, I have a meeting at 10 o'clock today with the state because now the CDC has revised our deliverables. So the health directors will find out what that means, how much more work we have, and if we have to revise our grants or not.
You remind me what the second.
Public Health Emergency Preparedness Grant. So we have a whole different set of deliverables just for public health from the CDC and DPH on trainings we have to do, tabletops, pod exercises, all that fun jazz. Speaking of that, the state came down, Office of Local Health and Emergency Preparedness on Tuesday, August 2nd. They went over all the plans with me that we have for mass dispensing, public health emergency preparedness, the COVID annex, pandemic flu, you know, the smallpox, you know, all these lovely things. The ELC2 grant is still held up in the Attorney General's office. They keep playing with the language up there, where the ELC grant 1 was done under executive orders. So we bypassed that whole state nightmare. So only one health department so far has received their grant. We are still guaranteed to $74,344.98. It's just a question of how many revisions and hoops we have to jump through. Regarding the CHIP and our community health needs assessment, the next meeting is Wednesday, September 14th with New Vance. So we'll begin drafting the community health needs assessment. And as I said, the booster clinics and flu clinics. And then I added in there some charts because mental health seems to be a big topic. So out of one of my surveillance systems, I have 6 different surveillance systems that I have to monitor. And as you see in there, the 18 to 24 is our highest group. This is data directly from the hospitals and urgent care for suicide ideation. And then you see the 55 to 64 is the second group. And then we also put in there from OD map of the overdoses in town and by age group of our residents for the last 90 days. And then for monkeypox, we currently have no cases yet. There's 91 as of this morning so far in Connecticut. And nationwide, there's almost 19,000 now, but there's no deaths. So that's important. The problem with the monkeypox is testing is very difficult. You have to wait to the actual pustule develops and bursts. And then you have to swab the pustule and do a PCR test. So it's not like COVID, you just do your nose or you have the rash. It's a much harder way to test. And a lot of times these pustules are in the genital area or in the mouth. So it can't be something at a state test site, obviously, you know. So you got to go to primary care providers. The state's working with a lot of STD clinics as well. There's still very limited Jynneos vaccine available. So they're still not recommending widespread vaccination. There's only 15 providers. Local health doesn't even have the vaccine yet because there's not enough of it. But you do have to get referred from local health after doing a screening from local health that you were in direct contact with someone, you know, who either was exposed or has it within the last 14 days and sexual partners. So that we continue to monitor. Hopefully it doesn't become a big thing because we don't need more work right now.
The 74,000, you know, there's 10 of it for a consultant or something. Where's the rest of it?
No, there's no,
Increase in wages for the health department?
no, there's no money for a consultant. It's for my nurses.
I thought there was a 10,000.
No, the 11,000 is for the public health emergency preparedness grant.
Right.
No, we don't get a raise. We haven't gotten a raise. I work unpaid hours. I find that insulting. Jim. Do you like to pay me for my thousands of hours? But no, the EOC grant is to pay for the nurses ongoing for the vaccinations, for the case follow-up and all that jazz. And for testing, it's specifically for enhancing laboratory capacity, ELC.
And that's 1 year.
It goes to 2024 because they delayed it so long.
Jen, do you know, is there efforts by the manufacturers to ramp up production of the monkeypox vaccine? Is that going to be more widespread?
They're trying, and they even changed the way it's administered. So instead of intramuscular, now it's intradermal. So now they get 5 times the amount of vaccine. So they're spreading it that way. But that's why right now they're really targeting the age groups in the demographic that they know it's really affecting. So there's been a lot with the state and primarily the STDs, because that's the #1 way it's being transmitted right now. Is you really have to have, or at like concerts when you're shirtless and somebody has them and you're rubbing against the pot. So it's not like COVID where you're just in a room and you all get it, thankfully.
Jen, how do you feel about general preparedness for surges and pandemic or new pandemics and stuff like that in terms of the learning? You see holes within the town infrastructure that we might want to.
I don't see holes in the town. I see massive holes in the federal response. I mean, monkeypox should have never became what it is. You had a small little stockpile of smallpox vaccine, you know, with contact tracing. You could have nipped it in the bud if you were more forthcoming with who it was affecting, you know, because in May when this started, you know, they just weren't doing the outreach they needed to get to those populations. I mean, and we didn't learn anything, the country, not saying New Canaan, we've done above and beyond, but you know, with testing, not having places where people can go testing, because they say go to your primary care provider, and the primary care provider is like, oh, I can't do it, go to a state. There is no state site. You can't have people half naked trying to get swabbed, you know, and that's the difficulty. And I draw the line at that. I'm not paid enough for swabbing hospitals. I've swabbed enough noses. I know what everybody's nose
Are the monkeypox vaccinations that are now being administered slowing down the spread in the areas where it's prevalent? What's the, any reports on that?
I have no idea. I mean, California and New York have the most cases.
Right.
So, I
They've
mean,
had clinics in certain areas.
they've gotten the most
They've been
supply.
swamped with people wanting the
So
vaccine.
like the state health department got a very, very small supply to try to do, you know, stamping it out, and it's,
What I read in New York, yes, I think so. The groups they were most concerned about, they're vaccinating, the numbers have come.
Do they think that children have enough coverage from smallpox, their original doses of smallpox vaccine, that they'll be less impacted in school?
so most of the children don't have smallpox, even I don't, as a 43-year-old. They stopped doing smallpox in somewhere in the 50-year-old age group because it was eradicated. But the problem with diseases is it's eradicated here, not eradicated everywhere else. And now with so much travel and people going around, you know, polio is back. We are still vaccinating for polio in the US, but polio is in, you know, New York, you know, it's, and our children are required to get all that stuff to get in to school system, so. So our older demographic will be somewhat protected because they did have the smallpox vaccine.
Yeah, that battery of tests or shots to get into school is administered by the pediatrician.
Primarily, and in community health centers, some local health departments. Yeah, I mean, like us, we can get any vaccine now, so whatever, New Canaan Pediatrics tells me they have a need for, then we'll do it, people ask for it.
The flu vaccine for the high school kids, so that's a newish venture for you.
Well,
Is that a recommendation or mandate or?
it's the state health department's pushing it because it's all free vaccine and they want to up the numbers. So, before, like Janet would only do the teachers and not the students because, the school, it goes through insurance, but when you're self-paid, that means the school's still paying for it. So, this way it will help keep our schools healthy through the winter, because respiratory disease, flu A and flu B, as you know, are very dangerous to children.
I spoke to Janet yesterday, there were 8 positive students, COVID positive. What's our town number? I know it was in the 20s for a while, last few weeks.
We have
down to
15.
single digits. 15.
Which is normal for this time of year until about Halloweenish when it begins to really go up.
Any reports on the hospitals about how they're doing with more serious cases?
Stanford's in single digits,
Yeah,
according to
no,
Dr.
no.
Reed.
No, our students.
Is anyone on ventilators anymore? Remember?
No.
Is that big deal?
Since the last report.
No, because now you have antivirals, so when you begin to get sick, you can go take Paxlovid. There's still monoclonal. We just had a resident do that, so there are other options. We're not at 2020 anymore, which is good.
The treatment is paying somewhat from just oxygen through a nasal cannula through pumps and to high flow oxygen as opposed to used to go, if you could maintain your oxygen level at a certain level, then you went on a ventilator. Now they go to the high flow and it seems to make a world of difference in terms of recovery, damage to the lungs, mitigating it.
But we still have people who are pretty darn sick.
Absolutely, a small numbers, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.
Next item on the agenda, Bethany, we disappeared, but it was necessary to join us for a brief period. Yes, Marcy is going.
Can you guys not hear me? Because that's a little intimidating.
You come on the hot seat. We like you guys.
That's what HS has got. What are you talking about?
I'm going to combine Bethany's report
Okay.
and mine. The first being the 6th annual Community Addiction Awareness Vigil is tonight, and Human Services is a sponsor along with a bunch of other different community organizations. It starts at 6:30. At 7 there's a live band, and then there will be some wonderful guest speakers.
Thank you for bringing that up, and if we can all attempt to go.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Of course. We are working with the Y on programming with a spin on behavioral health and seeker focused opportunities. We've been collaborating with Town Players Entertainment in February. They're producing Ordinary People, and they want to partner with organizations to educate people about behavioral health issues and human services, setting them up with contacts, referrals, etc. Bethany and I are both becoming certified, and this is going to be something new. I don't know if anyone's ever heard it, but with IDA through Cornell Weill Medical and UPenn, and it is a semi-structured interview tool that helps to assess decision-making abilities in seniors. So that I would use during home visits with APS. It was designed for APS workers. Connecticut does not have it, and they happen to have it in their plans months ago, and we contacted Cornell, and they want us to allow us.
What does it stand for, the idea?
It's interview for decisional abilities. Yeah.
Is there some write-up, give us a flavor of what's
I can
in
do
that
that.
interview? That sounds pretty significant.
Sure, I can absolutely.
Great, thank you.
So it's going to be a wonderful tool because It's kind of like the mini mental health exam. It's like, it's the same vocabulary for everyone. It's the same structure for everyone. So once it becomes a little more widespread, it'll be great. You know, we'll all know where we are. So we are doing that. There were 2 evictions in August. We had 49 renters rebate applications with $26,000 in awards given. Energy assistance is starting today. I think that we are going to start with the application right after Labor Day. We anticipate it being a little heavier of a load of applications. Canaan Parish is now responsible for their utilities, where we were not. So that will be, there will be a new, I think, energy assistance. We are working with Russ Hines, and not sure if he's in anymore, Russ Hines at EOC regarding plans for sheltering and community recovery for mass violence events, which we never need, but we are working with them. The New Canaan Urgent Assessment Program is now in its 7th week. We met at Silver Hill last week, and there were 20 assessments completed, and the age range was from 8 years to 45 years old. The Chamber of Commerce and Chubb have been working to give donations to the food pantry. Chamber of Commerce raised $5,000 for Walter Stewart, and Chubb gave a donation of $25,000. That's it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
On the Silver Hill project, is there, has the 20 people that have been involved so far actually found a resource
That
as
is,
a result of that?
yeah, Silver Hill is really in charge of all of that, but
They're doing assessment, not treatment.
they're doing assessments, but they also have names of organizations that are willing to see them in a timely manner, and they do set them up with
So you
resources.
could say that's working as originally planned.
I'm so thrilled with this number, yeah.
Marcy, is the 20, is that over the whole stretch?
That's over the 6 weeks.
As of like the beginning of last week, so that might be up now. And then
Okay.
2 were non-New Canaan residents, just 2 of those.
So that would imply 3 people a week at least for that initial period.
I think they got a lot in the beginning. I think they were averaging, I think they can take 5 a week.
Okay.
So that first week they had 5, but I mean, as we know, in Canaan, a lot of people were away. So that number will probably drastically go up.
And they do get a lot of calls. It's just that, you know, in order to see if they qualify, they are actually being seen by somebody, or they are, they do have medical help. So then they no longer qualify. This is for someone who is not currently under mental health treatment.
First, I have a question about energy assistance. Can you speak a little more about where the funding comes from and how robust it is? I'm just thinking, if this is the first time Canaan Parish residents have had to pay for their own utilities, and we're looking at a winter where energy is going to be significantly more expensive than it has in the past. Is there a potential for people's heat to be shut off?
Well, for someone that's living at Canaan Parish, it's a combo of some of them are Section 8, some of them are affordable housing, some of them might pay market rent. I'm not quite sure if there are any in there. But so now they're, as you mentioned, they're required, I think we've all turned to gas, so that's gas now. So they have an Eversource gas bill, which that's how they'll heat, and an Eversource electric bill. That used to be covered under the old building for new construction. So how Eversource works is they give like a stipend depending on how your household, what your income levels are, so you could get upwards. We've seen with electric, we don't know much about gas yet. People could get $900, and generally they give that at the end of the season. So we'll get that money in April to come
And
off.
I'll pay Eversource directly. None of these funds, and it's a state-run program. And so we have never, I don't think we've run other funds.
Too many, no, they wouldn't, we've never heard that someone was turned away, but you have to qualify.
And they won't be at risk to having anything turned off as long as they have qualified for energy assistance. Eversource will work with them on a payment plan. So even if they owe $2,000, they can only afford $39 a month. That's an Eversource.
But one thing we have not seen is
if were an electric heat client, if you were very low income, you could get on something called a low budget worksheet, which they were requiring people to pay $50 a month, and your electric could be $300, and in the winter months possibly more. We've not seen yet if there's a gas program, but I would imagine it's gonna be kind of a similar need. So we're hoping that, we'll kind of learn more about that, this, for these families.
Yeah, and Energy Systems was great. I think they started last year or 2 years ago that regardless of how you heat, if you heat with oil or gas, everyone who did qualify for energy systems was also given a $700 credit towards their Eversource electric bill. So everyone was given that.
Was that due to COVID?
I don't know. It's
I'm not sure if that's gonna be offered again, but we then will pick up and help, they'll still get that money, but then we see, we're often paying people's electric, gas. And with the new building, and that's gonna probably, we'll get all those referrals as well, then.
Thank you. Jackie,
Yeah, so
Youth and Family Services.
do you want me to go up or, I'm loud, as you all know. So in the month of August, like the first week, I had 5 new families. I mean, so that's like unheard of, just in such a quick time. So several of them, I kudos to, there's a new manager at Millport. It's the same company as Kane and Parish, but it's a new person in the position, and she literally filled, they had several empty apartments. She filled those in a very quick amount of time. So a lot of them have been new clients that have moved into that apartment. I also think her and then the one that's worked at Kane and Parish has been in the role for a very long time. They tell clients about us immediately, so they're a tremendous referral source for us. And all of those families were able to partake in our back to school backpack gift card drive. So that's great because we got them in the nick of time, and then we're able to provide them all, with that support. And that being said, we had 66 $50 Walmart gift cards given to students, grades K through 12, and 52 took backpacks. We've been giving backpacks to some of our families for every year. Do backpacks hold up? I mean, as long as we say, if you really need one, say you need one, but we were hoping to give it to new families, and we were able to. We have heard from a couple of the Unite for Ukraine families. One I've been working with closely in particular, but I think Sadie's also a family. Just to get a shout out to like Harrison, we were in a crunch with one family. The boy needed a physical to start school, and if anyone knows anything about this, they've come over here but have not had access to benefits right away and work permits, so they're like kind of in limbo, and you can't go to school without a physical. So Harrison made a call. The boy had a physical that day, and that pediatrician in town popped that visit, and they were very helpful. And someone actually in the office spoke, I like goosebumps, but spoke like rushed into them, so they felt. His mom is funny. She says over the phone she has trouble understanding me, but in writing, and I'll usually translate it, which is great. But it was helpful to have that person in the office, and I think Harrison knew who that person was. So that was so amazing. And literally they were overwhelmed with the fact that it was within the same day we were able to make it happen. We had 2 DV reports. One was earlier in the month, and then one just came in. There was like a minor involved. So I'm going to work with the police on just sort of how to support that family. But as we typically seen, things could go up once school starts. I think people get through their vacations, and then school starts, everyone's back in the month of their schedules, and things flare up in families. So I'm sure we'll be seeing more of that. I actually, in addition to those 5 new families, the school has referred 1 new family. They have to complete a financial assessment and give that back to see if they qualify for our services or food pantry and things like that. The other one is someone that we've been working with, trying to bring them on. Sometimes people are hesitant to give that information to us and get it. So hopefully this time around they will take us up on that. I mentioned before, the social service consultant for the nursery schools, just to consult families or the preschool directly and their staff on issues that they need talks, things to help them with that. It's 10 so far. There may be like 1 or 2 that don't use me, but, that there's 10 that I oversee. And actually, the Y came on. They were one that I was not doing theirs, but they actually signed on with us this year, which is great. And then there used to be an old program called the Parent Exchange in Stanford. It has since transformed, and now they're called Help for Kids. But years ago, like they would go into people's homes and help parents with parenting skills. So I would make referrals in the beginning when I started, and then people were insulted when you said, "Would you like some parenting skills?" So one came through, East School Principal called me, we had one that I know the family, and I thought, let's see, if this person would be willing, and let me see, and they certainly are in existence. The next day, I got a call, they're already outreaching to the family, and they'll go in the home and actually help the parents. Like if it's bedtime or school transition, whatever, that, you know, sometimes eating, I mean, some basic things that I feel like everyone would know, people struggle with these things. And then as we made that referral, I thought of another family that could potentially benefit from this, so the school is going to outreach to them because they know more about what's going on there. And then one last thing, our newsletter, Alicia had put my name, I think it was it Facebook Moms that you said if you want to, I had like, I would say 20 people reach out to get put on that. But so I just sent out the newsletter the other day, and I had a 59.1 open rate, which usually it's in the like 30s, and you're proud of that. I mean, that's, I'm like, great stuff. Thanks. I feel like I was lacking some positive things. It was all like the support groups, but the library didn't have a chance to like get me some stuff they were doing. I did reach out to a bunch of people for that. But
Quick question.
yeah.
The information that we get from on income and qualification for service, do we have to share that with the state or feds or anybody? It never goes beyond.
No, that's the great part. I remember, you know, just, I think other communities, I think Darien might, like, they might cap what they help someone with too. And like, we sort of really look, we don't want to obviously be helping the same person with solving every single one of the problems. Because that is one thing I will say I've noticed, that things used to be easy in your cases as well. Like maybe someone comes in, they need 1 or 2 things, and we're like, all right, it's like 15 things, and they're all imminent, and it's like counseling, bills, loss of job, like kids need, you know, other supports, recreational stuff. So it's like, you're like, oh my God, how do we, you know, and then if it's a single parent, it's actually, I think it's about 105 families that utilize our services. And I was trying to count, less than 10 are married couples in that, like, so these are single parents having to like navigate these things. So, but the urgent assessment, we're very happy about that. We also want to do more of like post-pension stuff. So we're going to be meeting with the school and kids in crisis, probably Bethany and myself, Marcy and a few other players to talk about, just make sure that we have a good plan. People know about that urgent assessment. All right, and I know Ann is here. Ann is from the ABCC. If any of you don't know.
Thank you, Jackie, for doing that. Under old business, we'll make this quick. Marketing. So as good as HHS is, and everyone's very busy, we still want everyone in the community to be aware of HHS and the services they provide. So we've discussed this. So mostly Bethany, and we have contacted the New Canaanite and Hearst, the New Canaan Advertiser. So we've set something up. It's not the final deal yet, but in process. New Canaanite would do something, just put it online. It would cost approximately $3,600 per year. It would be on a daily basis. And we could do 12 months to 6 months, and that's out there for your opinions. And also with Hearst, similar, entry would be a monthly advertisement, and we still have to define exactly what it would be. That would be roughly $3,000 per year would be put in once a month. It would be color print ads for the New Canaan Advertiser. And our goal with that is they also have a digital thing, but with the senior citizens, and the more senior you are, the less you use the computer. That you put that in the advertiser, even though we know the quality is not quite what it was. Still, that's also an option for, I'm not sure that we got into whether they do it for 6 months, but at least get for 12, it's a definite. Quickly, what is the, think about the time of 6 months adequate? Do we want to do 12 months?
I just ask one question. What is the content going to be? Is it to have a specific focus
Just
on use?
an endorsement of who we are, services we provide.
So it's not usable information other than that, not news or business.
So this is highlights.
The first would be to make people aware. Secondly, if there's requests and we see there's a gap, then we could call for something. So more specific information.
I can do like a little, like doesn't have to do with final, but just the amount of information I wanted to see what it would look like. Okay. So it's like just the basic.
That looks great.
Hold on. And super rough draft. I just wanted to see if we could fit everything that we wanted to fit.
So would you?
I think I'm leaning,
one issue.
I'm leaning a little differently. I think it's okay, and I think it's the right thing to do to communicate to the communities of what Health and Human Services does. But I think we should also use that platform to educate people in terms of vaccinations that are coming up. We should use the educational platform more than just Health and Human Services, and here's a phone number to call, and it's a constant going thing. So while I appreciate, letting the community know, here we are, here's the phone numbers to call, here's the access points. I think if we're going to go this way, we should be educating the community as well.
I'm good with that. I'm good with that, yeah.
And the call out that Bethany had suggested was looking for a home healthcare agency, because that's a call that we get a lot. So what we could do is have like a basic template and then always pop in and maybe do like a month, or I know both Lincoln and I worked with them closely before, they don't mind if you swap something out. So we could also be a little bit nimble in terms of like what we're.
That sounds
Yeah.
really good, based on what the issues are.
Just like regroup, another month and see.
Well, listen, do you work on that?
Did I?
Will you?
Oh, yeah. No, he's
Let the minutes reflect we're in trouble.
We do have a little bit of a time issue, so we will either get back to that next month, or in the meantime, we'll work on it and define it better, and thanks for the input. Next is role of the commission, some of the items we discussed our last meeting, grants. Bethany has voiced that the town of Buchanan is not successful in obtaining grants, and I spoke to the first selectman, Kevin Moynihan, and he said the same thing. He said, it's Buchanan, it's Darien, it's Wilton, it's Westport, just no success doing this. It's Bridgeport, it's Stanford, it's New Haven. So, appreciated. Kevin did allude to possibly in the future having someone, an employee of the town, be involved with communications, and for the rare case where a grant seems to be appropriate, to have that person be the grant writer also. So that's a TBD. Thanks for your input and some suggestions about going forward, what the commission does and doesn't do, or what have you. And most of those things we will deal with in the near future. The priority item came up for our last meeting also was domestic violence. I did speak to our first selectman about that, just finances, and can we finance some of these families in need or spouses in need, et cetera, and he reiterated that the town does not get involved with domestic violence other than referring to DVCC and marital disputes also. They just don't get involved in that. So that leads into our new business, which is our Domestic Violence Crisis Center, and our guest speaker, and Broadwell.
Morning, everyone.
Nice to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Where would you like to?
So I do have slides because I'm a visual learner and I have numbers for you that I didn't want to say incorrectly. So I'm not sure how that usually works. Or it's supposed to be here. Right. No, I think I can make my laptop.
Well, you have to hit, I think, share screen, and then you have to get into the Zoom call. You're gonna have to log into the Zoom.
Bam. Okay, like me over here.
Yeah, we, it's longer at the Zoom.
Email your building.
And then that way, once you get to the Zoom, and they hit share screen, you
Yeah.
can share.
Maybe a couple. Yeah, sure, but
Perfect. During COVID.
So just a little background about Ann. She's a graduate of Hope College, where she graduated Phi Beta Kappa, and then received her master's in social work from Hunter College. And she is the associate director of domestic violence. And it's great to have you.
Thank you. I did not know I did that introduction. Wonderful. There are some familiar faces here, so that is great. I will multitask and talk and this setup at the same time. I do have holders for almost all of you, if you would like some more information. And what's the Wi-Fi here? Ooh. Yes, Matt? Yes. Thank you. So, my plan for today was to give you information about the services that DECC provides to Canadian residents. I'm also going to talk about numbers for New Haven, around numbers served, lapse screens, DV arrests. I'll talk about some of the things we're seeing in terms of trends that we might be seeing in New Canaan. And of course, do a little bit of domestic violence 101, right? Because that informs like why we need certain services. Does that make sense and seem appropriate? Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so the Domestic Violence Crisis Center, we serve 7 communities in Lower Fairfield County, including New Canaan. And we provide support and advocacy services for individuals who are experiencing abuse in their personal relationships. We offer a wide variety of services that are free and confidential. And really our goal is to help people on their journey to safety. Safety looks different for everyone in every family. And we like to use the term journey because safety and healing does not happen overnight in domestic violence, right? So almost all of our clients are working with us over several months. It's very unusual to have someone who has one contact with our agency. Thanks, Alyssa. It's got this.
And you just have to mute your device before.
So, yeah.
Say that needs to be done.
It's good having a young person.
Do him.
Recording in progress.
So while I'm
You can mute. There you go. Got it, got it.
You know, I say I'm tech savvy, but I really not. So I'm curious while I pull this up, how many people have heard of the Domestic Violence Crisis Center before? Okay, great. That is really wonderful news. Hopefully, my customers, you really never know, right? I think, an important takeaway is we think we know what domestic violence looks like, but it is impacts often folks that we think are least likely to be impacted. So everyone knows someone who's been impacted by domestic violence, whether you actually know it or not, right? Okay, we are in business. Thank you for your patience. This. Going to share. We are going to slideshow.
Bless you. For those first time
Just
seeing.
allergies and comments.
Okay, so I already talked about this. Really, our work is supporting individuals on their journey to safety. And that we have multiple services for individuals who are experiencing any level of domestic violence. So you do not have to be experiencing physical abuse to receive our services. That is a misconception often in our communities. Like a really big misconception. They say, well, I can't go for services because I'm not being hit. But it's not to that level yet. I don't need that support. But there's so many services and support we can provide, even if someone's not experiencing physical abuse.
And just if you click on the icon that has the photos down at the bottom, it won't block any of your slides.
Oh,
Over to the right,
yeah.
if you just click on the top of that and slide it down to the bottom, it won't block any of your slides. In other words,
Thank you.
no, it's on the top of it. You can slide it, just hold on to it and push it down to the bottom.
It is on the bottom on my
No,
screen.
no, no. You see what the blue lines are?
Yeah.
Yeah, go to the right of that.
On her
On the
screen,
top.
it's doing.
On my screen.
Okay, I got it.
It's a lag, right?
I think there is. We'll see. It says, and I'll let you know what it says.
All right.
Thank you. So, what is domestic violence? This is important to understand to then understand the services, possible barriers for residents. So domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behaviors used by someone to gain power and control in their relationship. So gaining power and control over someone is the motivation at the core of domestic violence. It's not actually about anger. Okay, so when we're talking about different types of abuse, you want to remember these different types of abuse are tools in which someone maintains control in that relationship. And therefore victims feel powerless, hopeless, and like they don't have any control. Additionally, we're talking about a pattern of abusive behaviors. So I'm not talking about a single isolated incident. I'm talking about behaviors that often escalate over time. That is a slow, gradual progression.
I hate, I mean, but would this include acrimonious divorce situations? Where the relationship, at least one, both parties want to end it, but there's tremendous, acrimony and violence and stuff. But how, is that included in that category?
So we see quite often that abusers will use the legal system to maintain power and control to stop divorces from happening. Frivolous motions. I mean, we've had clients who are caught up in a divorce for 5+ years. That's a very common, particularly in communities of affluence, common theme, right? Because someone has the money to have that legal representation to continue to do those frivolous motions within the court. Yep. So again, we're talking about a pattern of behavior that escalates over time. So because there's that pattern and that gradual escalation, it's very difficult for victims and survivors to recognize that abuse is happening, and it becomes normalized. So that's often a barrier for folks, is recognizing that the situation they're in is abusive, and that's why it's so important that we provide awareness and education in the community about what does constitute abuse.
Do you have a working, because relationships are really complicated. Right?
Yes.
But is there like a working barrier or line that says this is the thing that we watch for, is almost shorthand to say it's getting into a sort of a dangerous zone, because again, like I said, relationships are complicated, they go up and down.
Yeah. I wish it was so easy to say there's one thing. Yes, we do have, this is a very loud here. I would say put, we do have typical warning signs of abuse. So that's things like isolation from friends and family and their support systems, which is often masked as, I just really care about you, I want to spend time with you, or your family doesn't really like you to talk bad about you, so you can't go see them. Right, so there's that manipulation and that coercion there. So isolation from friends and family, and I would say just in general, possessive, controlling behavior, right? Like controlling who people see, how much money they spend,
Is there, maybe building on what Peter's saying, is there a questionnaire I mean, almost like a self-assessment.
We do have that.
Okay, so having a link to an online self-assessment may be an opportunity to say, you know, I'm being abused, or it can be emotional, it can be financial, it doesn't have to be physical abuse. To at least have that person, you know, start thinking about, you know, their reaction and what they can do to help themselves.
Mhm.
So there is a self-assessment that's online.
It's not on our website, but we could put it there or work with you all to figure out how we can get that assessment to folks. And the language, you know, if you said yes to this column, you may be in an abusive relationship and there's, you know, help available. So there definitely is an assessment.
There are questions like that when you go to the doctor, right, that are on this survey that you fill out. That ask about that. It's not
So-
happened in the last-
It depends.
oh, maybe
We
my-
love to hear that.
Yeah.
But that is not every single medical provider.
So it's-
But one of the trainings we do provide is for healthcare professionals to really understand the health implications of domestic violence and to implement universal screening. So having it be part of your intake at the doctor, just like they ask you about smoking and alcohol use, asking you questions and asking the right questions. Because it's not, are you safe at home? Because you can be not safe at home because you have bad water or mold. It's actually, is there anyone in your life who's hurting you or threatening you with it? So we can also provide that technical assistance to providers.
How important are peer recognition and friends and stuff like that? Because if you're the focus of a insidious step-by-step approach, it's harder to see. Is friend recognition saying, hey, just between us, I'm a little uncomfortable with where things seem to be going with you? Is that a really vital piece of prevention and protection?
Yes. I would say friends and family, but people need to have language and understanding how to approach someone, right? Because friends often think they're trying to help, but then they'll use judgmental language. Of course, their beliefs on this person, and what does that do to victims and survivors? They're gonna push back. Someone else in my life is trying to control me. Another person is putting that control on me. And so I think we do have, I think that, yeah, that's real quick. This handout is really helpful for lay folks about how to help someone experiencing abuse. Discuss their rights and what they deserve. Right? So talking about, do you feel respected in that relationship? Are you equal? Right? And talking about that's a right that everyone deserves in their relationship, which might land better than identifying the red flags or something. Every situation is different. So yes, friends and family are vital in helping victims to understand what's happening. So when you're in it, it's very difficult to look at it from the outside.
And how can we as town leadership support victims, help them get help? What can we do as a town, even if we're not directly involved with a couple have a domestic violence relationship?
I think the continual challenge is raising awareness in a way that is approachable to folks. And it's very surprising in communities, people say, I actually didn't know there was any resource available to me. That is a very, very common response. And so raising awareness through email communication, newsletters, having things on websites, and just having it, I think, around, you know, in accessible places. So to say, you know, having things in bathroom stalls where there's a rip-off tab or someone can take something really quickly. And those things are actually very easy. They have a far reach. And they're sending a message to the community, right, that this is something that's important to us and there are resources available. I also want to thank the town and health services for the grant that they have given teams in the past. They're very
So that's
appreciative.
one way to go.
That's one way to
Yeah.
go.
One of the challenges is there's stigmas associated with Broadwell. You know, it's a proud town, proud people, and there's lots of challenges below the waterline. It's very hard to get people to raise their hand. How do you recommend, I guess, leadership thinking about destigmatizing and making it a little bit easier to tentatively raise a hand.
Well, I think language is important, so sometimes communities like to focus on using like unhealthy or toxic relationships as the language that they talk about instead of abuse, that sometimes lands well for folks. I think what's really great about DVCC and the feedback we get from New Canaan residents is actually not being based in New Canaan. Our offices are in Norwalk and Stamford is helpful. They feel that that protects their confidentiality. No one's seeing them coming really in and out of office. So I think really focusing on the confidentiality piece of the services we provide. Additionally, we have higher confidentiality with our clients. We have privileged communication. This is in our state statutes because we're certified domestic violence advocates and we're part of our statewide coalition across the state. So we actually have very, very high confidentiality standards.
If someone can, a spouse or someone else in the family can access your emails and can do that, is there any way of communicating that's confidential that you have set up? Any type of portal that can't, specific to that person that can't be accessed?
Well, that would be wonderful if we had a portal. But what I will tell you, as part of our intake, the conversations we have with every client is what is a safe way to communicate with you and what are your safety needs. And that email is not a confidential means of communication because it can be intercepted and read. We do have tracking phones that we can give to our clients free of charge for them to make phone calls and texts on as their way of communication, but that is always part of the conversation.
One way that we've tried to do through HIPAA is send it encrypted so that the person at the end, they only have their password that they can put in to be able to read the email. So I'm just finding ways to be able to communicate if self-assessment occurs, that it doesn't, infuriate the spouse to another level to find out that that person has reached out.
I would follow the client's lead and what they think their safety concerns are with their spouse and what the spouse is tracking.
And I'd like to, before time escapes me, to call out to Dee Dee Bartlett, a good friend of our town, who's a big supporter. So thank you, Dee Dee.
Yes, DD is a wonderful supporter and does wonderful work with the New Canaan Abuse Prevention Partnership, which DVCC is a part of. Yeah.
Okay.
From a categorization standpoint, are you differentiating domestic violence from elder abuse? When the abuse is being perpetrated by the spouse
Or the power of attorney.
or the power of attorney.
I would categorize that as domestic violence because domestic violence is abuse within family or household members. Right, so we're not always talking about intimate partner violence, though a lot of our work is around intimate partner violence. It's domestic violence. Separate part of it, which could be elder abuse from a spouse, etc.
As a bill on Penny's question, how many people would you be serving on a monthly basis, or if you know, that would be senior abuse versus general spousal abuse, I guess?
I don't have those numbers.
For the ombudsman office, do you in a working relationship with them at all?
I'm sorry to say that
The
again.
ombudsman's office, which often hears issues, complaints of financial, with, someone, a daughter, a son, child that's abusing their parent, their elderly parent.
Yeah, we get referrals and communication from
Okay.
a wide variety of organizations.
I was asking my question because it makes a difference to whom you refer someone as to whether or not it's a domestic violence organization or the other organizations or professionals who are dealing with, a senior level person and. So it's
Yeah, I can definitely see.
differentiation of direction of taking help.
Right, and so I'll talk about the different services that we can provide. And you can kind of think about how that would translate to elder abuse, but definitely that language of domestic violence, being a domestic violence agency could be a barrier for someone who feels like, oh, that's actually not what's going on in that language, doesn't feel like it resonates with me. Okay, so domestic violence is not just physical, it's verbal, emotional, financial, technological, or sexual in nature. So that is important to remember. And in fact, many victims say that the most devastating form of abuse is emotional abuse, which involves coercive control, blaming, manipulation, impacting individual self-esteem. And so that really can have long-lasting impacts. Okay, I'm moving on to our services. So again, all of our services are free and confidential. So we do not charge for any of our services. And we have 5 main programs. We have counseling, legal advocacy, housing and financial, and emergency state housing, and a hotline. So I will talk a little bit about this. So individual and group counseling is for adults and children. And this counseling is providing emotional support for children and adults, psychoeducation on domestic violence and trauma, coping skills, grounding skills, safety planning. So for an example, I actually know we work with quite a few children and families from New Canaan. And a lot of that work is providing education in an age-appropriate way about domestic violence and those dynamics in their household. So for example, the child saying, I'm really confused right now because I know what this person is doing is bad, right? And they're no longer here, but I still love them and miss them. And what does that mean? Right? So our counselors can kind of talk through that and provide some education around that. And we also do a lot of safety planning, particularly when children are now doing visitation with an abusive parent, and how they can stay emotionally and physically safe. Okay, we also provide legal advocacy. So we provide advocacy and information around a domestic violence arrest or a family violence court case. So this advocacy is arraignment through the final disposition, so the entire length of that case. Our advocates reach out to victims the morning of the arraignment, and we have next day arraignment here in Connecticut for family violence. So the following business day that will be the arraignment. And our advocate's role is to explain that criminal justice system to the victim and to advocate for that victim in court. So whether the victim wants, what kind of level of protective order they want. The victim has the right to tell the court and what they want for that order of protection, whether they want a program for this individual or not. We also help with victim impact statements as well. Was there a question?
Well, this is kind of why the town doesn't get involved. This sort of stuff is requires a very confidential, private agency that's focused solely on this stuff.
Exactly. And another thing is domestic violence is so complex that every single client's situation is different. Okay, so they might say, I don't want a protective order in place. I want them in my house. You know, I want them to be part of my children's lives. Or people say, I'm not going to call the police because I don't want them arrested because I don't want them to lose their job. Because how am I going to pay my bills if my partner loses their job? Right. So our role is to explain the different options, and they can tell us what resonates with them and what will make them safer. So for example, the next thing on this list is assisting with restraining orders. Many folks do not think that restraining orders are going to make them safer. In fact, they say that's going to escalate the abuse. I'm not going and doing an affidavit and having a marshal serve my abuser. That's actually going to escalate, right? So having experts like us who can talk through the different options, because at face value, many people in the community say, okay, a restraining order. That will help. But we can talk through the considerations.
This may be a total dead end, but the best solution is if the abuser stops abusing. Is there you make any effort to try to do that, or is that just hopeless?
Or stated another way, rehabilitation, because the physical violence piece is clear. And that is a real line, but the subtlety of the other pieces, there's a possibility there wouldn't be awareness you drift into something bit by bit, and is that plausible? Is there a way to avert a worsening and maybe improving the relationship from a preventive perspective?
Well, so part of our mission is to prevent domestic violence, so we have to be talking about rehabilitation of abusers, right? And not just solely be talking about victim services. That's one very important piece of the puzzle that we are experts on. So we have many different programs, is kind of the term that the legal system uses for abusers to go to after an arrest. And so there are definitely programs out there with that goal in mind.
Yeah. But I'm kind of tuned into the psychological components, right? Warning signs, red flags, because you kind of get that feeling that
Dr. Hanford.
You can take the mouse. You
Right,
can
She's
click
like-
on any young computer.
I don't want to hear what you said.
You may not.
Financial requirement to get these victim services, or are they available regardless of financial status?
They're available regardless of financial status. There is no financial requirement for our services. We do ask and track that for some of our state and federal funding we receive, we come to. But there is absolutely no income requirement whatsoever.
Gotcha. So even for, because I know this has come up in the past in New Canaan, there are women who were part of a very affluent household and then are, their husbands cut off everything and then they're sort of on their own. So on paper, it looks like they have lots of money, when in reality they have none. They can come to you for help. That's wonderful.
Yes, and we would be the place to go because we understand financial abuse and the impacts. And so we would never say, oh, because your, say, husband's bank account has this many dollars in it, you can access that, and that's your right. We would know, abusers, I will say, well, research shows that financial abuse happens in 99% of domestic violence. That is because, think about it, when you're doing financial abuse, you're making this person financially dependent on you, and this person is less likely to leave. And then when you're looking at affluent communities, often financial abuse is very invasive because they have the financial resources to their control over. They're talking about power and control. Right? So when you have a lot of financial resources, you can control those resources.
So to Peter's point though, about rehabilitation, and we have, and this is all great stuff. So I appreciate you being here. You have a self-assessment on the person that's being abused. Is there any way to do a self-assessment on the abuser that they may, as Peter said, they're going through life and they don't realize that they're doing X, Y, and Z. And this is a way of them saying, oh my gosh, I'm looking at myself, right? And then to turn that, you have different types of abuse. Like this is called domestic violence abuse. Ombudsman would deal with, whoever is your power of attorney, potentially your daughter and son. But then you have bullying that can occur, in school and things of that nature. So I'd like to look at it at 360 degrees in the way and look at whether or not we can do a self-assessment for individuals who may not know that they are abusing. I think that's a key.
It's almost like the subacute issues where it's starting to move in that direction without awareness. It seems from an education perspective, or even just to have this list be known to people,
Right.
I think you could avoid a number of situations, and there's something in that maybe. I mean, I'm always focused on subacute of all the stuff we talk about.
I think it's hand in hand with any mental health awareness we're going to be doing, because I think in most cases, people who are abusing do have an underlying mental health sort of something's going on there, and that might make them even more unaware of what they're doing. But as long as we have a stigma around mental health diagnoses, it doesn't really do any good if we have a huge stigma and we say, oh, this person has X, Y, Z condition, because then they're stigmatizing the condition. But then the reverse is true, where someone is less likely to seek help for their behavior because they have a stigmatized condition potentially. Like, just, I'm thinking about from the town perspective of what we're trying to accomplish.
Do you think it would be possible to use this forum of the newspaper, the online newspaper, and sort of that could be one of the things that you highlight?
You could even do a call out of each,
Your slides are great.
Yeah.
Just each month a different slide.
Those questions here are just really good.
Oh, yeah, that's the baseline of the assessment.
Yeah.
It's much longer, but I pulled that.
Yeah, I think those are great questions.
Yeah.
Because exactly, that is, you know, everything.
Yeah.
But you guys are thinking about this in the right way, right? Like about all the 360 view of all the different factors that are coming into play here. And I have a slide, we talk about my 3 different programs, our victim services, awareness and education, they all overlap, right? So we work with New Canaan Cares a lot. Let's say someone comes to a program with New Canaan Cares. They recognize the red flags of domestic violence and that friend is actually experiencing that. They then go and help their friend and connect them to our services. Then after that friend is safe and feels healed and recovered, they then invite us back to do an awareness program at their church, right? Like there's this really big overlap of those dynamics, right? You can't just have the services for victims because people need to know about them.
How could we help you?
I honestly, the raising awareness, I think is really critical here in New Canaan. And some of those red flags, and of course, monetary support is always helpful. As I'm sure you all are aware, the past 2 years, there was a lot of funds because of COVID. And so not all of those funds are now available as we transition to.
And to what extent do you financially help these families? And you align yourselves with, in the legal battle, with the abuse vows?
We do not provide legal representation and attorneys. That is not something that we have the capacity for. And again, remember how I said divorces can take 5 years, right? The capacity to stay with a client for 5 years representing them. So we provide we have referrals to attorneys who do low cost, who know, understand domestic violence. And we help with restraining order applications and safety planning and knowing, helping people understand what to put in that, but we don't represent them at restraining order. Right? We don't have the capacity to do that. And in terms of financial assistance, we do not provide financial assistance through DVCC. We work with community resources who then provide that financial assistance. Does that make sense? So for example, for you all in New Canaan, some financial assistance programs that residents would be eligible for would be the rapid rehousing program that we have that has rental assistance for victims. It would be assistance through the Connecticut Coalition and Homelessness. If we can show that giving this person that financial assistance will prevent homelessness, the funding there for them. But again, that funding's not coming to us. That's through working with community partners, and we have really good working relationships with those partners, so they understand the sensitivity and sometimes the urgency of those requests. We do have a very small Brave Wings fund that we can provide victims, but that is not like a regular thing that we can provide. That's a very small fund for one-time assistance.
You get about 2/3 of your income from government, according to your annual report. Is that from the state mostly, or is it from the cities and towns?
That is mainly from the state and the federal government, because we are part of the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We receive that funding through them. So DSS funds our emergency shelter. We get local funding from the federal government.
You have a good grant writer.
That's an interesting question. Yes, so that's about 60% of our funding, 40% of it we have to self-generate.
But we like have an unbelievable list of donors here.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of community support with that way. It's really-
Yeah. We really do, and we cannot do this work alone, and really provide, we need the community support behind it. So I just want to focus back on these services real quick, and then do numbers for you. Oh, yeah, let's go. Okay, so, we help with the restraining orders. We also work with local law enforcement through the lethality assessment program. I'm not sure if you're aware of that program. It's across all of Connecticut. Essentially, law enforcement, New Canaan PD, when they go to a family violence incident, they do a screening for high danger for the victim on the scene. Is based in research and best practice. When we look at the violent homicides, there are key factors. When you look at domestic violence homicide, there's a researcher, Jackie Campbell, who does this across the nation. And so we know these factors increase lethality. And her research showed that the majority of domestic violence homicides had police intervention within the year prior to their death. And less than 6% were connected to their local domestic violence resource. So the purpose of this program with LAB is officers on the scene do the assessment with the victim. If they screen high risk in real time, they call our LAB hotline, and our advocacy safety plan with that individual. And the goal is to connect them to services. And I actually have your LAB data for you on the following slide for you. Housing and financial advocacy, housing advocacy, different programs that we're a part of, advocating on behalf of victims with their landlords and their issues, early lease termination. There are specific rights that victims have from Broadwell around housing. And there are safe housing crisis hotlines. So many clients are engaged in multiple programs at once. It's very uncommon for someone to come to us and just be engaged in one thing. And what's really important with our counseling is if someone is experiencing trauma reactions, they're hypervigilant, they're disassociating, it's gonna be very difficult for them to sit down with a legal advocate and process and think through a restraining order. Right, so we have to provide that counseling to be able to decrease those trauma reactions to help with the other services. Does that make sense? Okay. We talked about this. What does this look like in New Canaan? Financial abuse, coercive control through the legal system, technological abuse, right? If you have the ability to buy tracking devices and stalking software, compared to someone who maybe doesn't have the financial means to buy those things. And we also talked about this small town concern about the community finding out about the reputation, for the reputation of the victim and the abuser, right?
When the police go and they have an incident and they document the domestic violence, are the names ever public? The names of the family members involved in the violence, is that ever made public by the police? What else?
So the police can't make the victim's name public, but they can say the address in which it occurred. So that, yeah, so there are different thoughts on that, right? Of like, no, we shouldn't put the address because in small towns, you know who that is, right? You don't say who that is, the street, right? Not even number, people kind of, you know.
That's even pretty.
Right. So that's that. And then for a criminal case, it is versus the state of Connecticut, right? It's a crime against the state. So it's not gonna be John Doe versus Jane Doe, it's gonna be John Doe versus the state of Connecticut. Okay, so here are numbers for New Canaan. So some of these numbers are for fiscal year 21, and some are for fiscal year 22. 124 victims served in fiscal year 22. Of that, 35 were male and 89 were female. When we look at the age breakdown, there were 24 children and 7 young adults. We categorize that from ages 18 to 24. And 93 were adults. For the children and young adults, the services that they would have received to be counted in this number would either be child counseling, residing in our safe house, or being enrolled in a rapid rehousing program. Because for the rapid rehousing, we count everyone in the house.
How many households would you say this is? How many households?
For the children,
For the whole thing?
the whole thing,
How many families?
how many families?
Yeah.
I would probably say, I'm gonna go off of what I think
The
it
average?
is. Most of these are gonna be families and not singles. I know many families with multiple children.
So if you have a husband or wife with 2 kids, is that kind of 4 or what? Do you think that?
If their children receive services through us,
Okay.
all of those children would be included in that. This would not include abusers.
Okay, so the 93 adults, that might be a pretty good count of the number of families.
And when you said 2022, what is that a year-to-date number or is that an annualized number based upon?
An annualized number,
Okay.
that is July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022.
So if we said there were close to 100 families that received services, that might up, that's
It's a large number.
pretty good guess though. Pretty good ballpark. Okay,
And it would be surprising to people in town, I think.
we have,
I think it'd be very surprising to people in town, and I would guess it's like with anything else, when we talk about COVID positivity rate, probably higher.
Oh.
And what percent of these involve physical violence?
I don't have that.
What's your feel?
Educated is more a, I guess, to ask this question, we started, breaking it out in halves. Is it more financial abuse than it is physical abuse for educated?
I would say it's,
You don't have to.
sorry, yeah,
Just
Like-
that.
I would say it's very prominent, and also physical abuse. I mean, if I would say it for every.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think a pretty common preconception, mine certainly, is that domestic violence is physical violence.
Right.
And that's what triggers where cops come and all of those kinds of things, and the huge aha. Well, the huge aha for me is that it's a spectrum that is about control. And then it builds and builds and elevates to this other sort of level.
And I think another way that things get blocked off in New Canaan is the fact that there's no perfect system. And Darrow can come into play, and so when people are looking at families from the outside, they're like, well, they're both kind of doing the wrong thing. And then they don't even get involved because they see the relationship as toxic in a way that is separate from abuse.
And I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I hear domestic violence looped in with marital disputes, that happens for me where it frustrates me a little bit because I think, and the whole thing that has raised this for us right now is an incident that happened this summer that people are wondering about, was it, how was it handled? How could we handle this better? And it really was immediately right down to that, well, they're going through a divorce and everybody acts badly during divorces and we don't get involved in marital disputes. And I think that, I know that's parsing words, but it does frustrate me a little because I think when you say that, it makes it sound like, well, we all fight. We've all had blowout fights. It doesn't mean that we have domestic violence or abuse happening in our homes. And some of these people that were shuffling over into that category actually do have some stuff going on that requires more sensitivity and more services.
Yeah, and using that language to describe someone who is being abused is minimizing.
Yeah.
Really the impact it has on them.
And normalize, it. Like it's normal to have marital disputes. We all have marital disputes, but this is, there's a distinction.
And that's why working with us would be appropriate, because we'd be able to ask the right questions to understand, is this a marital dispute or is this domestic violence? Right? Questions that are really related to power and control and concrete examples to make that assessment.
And that's why I think that self-assessment on both sides, I think it's extremely important. And as a governing body, if we are taking the next level, making recommendations to our selectmen and our governing body, that maybe part of the HR policy is an assessment has to be done on X, Y, and Z. And what does that assessment look like? So I know for us as a large employer, we have to make those assessments every single day when it comes to, a husband or wife disgruntled showing up at work.
Yes.
As a prime example, okay, we have to deal with that. And even in New Canaan, from time to time. So I think this is a great opportunity to, open up the windows, right? Let everybody see what's going on to talk about it openly, but know that I think we have to have assessments on both spectrums and identification and a way of making some decision.
Well, awareness and education, this one tiering, that it's not just the physical stuff, but it really is about control. That is a whole new framing for, I'm sure, lots of people. And if we just get that message out, good is gonna happen.
Well, the word violence usually connotes physical.
Right.
Just, yeah.
Not suggesting we change the name, but. I don't have a better idea.
We do provide training for, around domestic violence in the workplace for supervisors and HR professionals. What are those red flags that would show up in the workplace, and what are some, considerations you can give employees? Because, you can't ask someone, are you experiencing domestic violence, and there's some ways you can approach that. So we really offer trainings to any, kind of professional. So I want to get back to these numbers real quick. 40 victims received criminal advocacy after a domestic violence arrest with us. That is a 2021 number. I did not have access to 2022. The rest of these are 2021 numbers. There were 27 lap screens completed in New Canaan. Of those, 22% screened at high risk, and of those 22%, 67% spoke to a domestic violence advocate in real time on the scene. We get even if law enforcement doesn't call us in real time, right? They're allowed to, right? We get the screens after the fact, and we'll do that follow up with the victim. Okay. So we were talking about, right, it's awareness, it's education, it's advocacy. We also provide education for youth around healthy relationships. We can't assume that people know what a healthy relationship looks like and have the skills and behaviors to engage in that, right? Those skills are not innate. We provide education in grades K through 12 in our communities. And then that awareness, right? We have task forces. Awareness month is coming up. October is domestic violence awareness month. So if you're thinking about some of this awareness, having that tied into October might be appropriate. And again, the advocacy and those victim services. We work in all of these areas. Okay, and that was all I had.
That was a lot.
So with COVID, we saw an spike in incidences. And now that it's simmering to some extent, are you seeing numbers drop or no?
It is simmering in that this is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the housing crisis, in terms of the economy, and the challenges with lack of safe affordable housing. Where do people go? And so that being it's what we're seeing is more complex scenarios and lack of community resources. For example, some of those financial assistance programs we're talking about, this week we got 2 emails. They tapped out funding. It's going to be a pause until they get more funding.
There was a great article in the Wall Street Journal on Friday that talked about the layoffs that are starting to occur in very high worth net people in the finance industry. So I agree with you, Andy. This is the tip of the iceberg, and as we see the economy getting worse, we had the COVID where everyone was working from home. Now as the economy is getting worse and people are getting laid off in very high profile, that's going to be another stressor. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about, there's the dynamic within the relationship, but then there are all these external factors, which, let's face it, anxiety is going through the roof. Technology is a big part of it, climate change, you name it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know how to think about that, because the pressure cooker component to this, I think, is a very big deal. To Harrison's question, how do we think about that?
Why mental health is going through the roof.
Yeah.
It's all related.
One thing I liked about Peter's comment with the friends. You don't have the physical element of domestic violence. So physical element, first, maybe not, second, third time they call it abuse, then they get stuck out. But it's the emotional abuse, the chronic emotional abuse. And you talk about friends, and you higher percentage of women, less with men. And women have their social relationships, maybe somewhat revealing. So how do friends of a victim generate involvement or get involved in the decision? It's a little bit like the active minds program that they're starting at the high school, you can maybe wherever. Its friends are sensitive to other friends' needs and issues, and then they will go to their counselor and say, you know, so-and-so just doesn't seem to be herself. How do friends get involved when they have a sixth sense of the other five too, that there's something significant going on?
I think just asking questions, how is your relationship going? You know, like, do you feel respected? Do you feel heard? You also can say what you're observing, right? Like, this is what I have seen. How does that make you feel? Right? So I've seen that they're putting you down in front of the children. Like, how does that make you feel? And getting them to talk. I think another thing that's really important for friends is being that support system when they do reach out for help. So it's not just giving the information to someone, it's following up with them. Like, did you make the phone call? Do you want me to sit down with you? Do you want me to go with you to the appointment? Right, so there's the both recognizing that it's happening, but then supporting them in that actual outreach, because sometimes there's that disconnect. I know it's available, but I'm scared. And I just need someone to be sitting with me to help me make this call or to talk to someone.
Thank you.
I think too, for what Peter, what you were getting at with the not sort of having that mind shift of what violence is and how it really can fall. In children, it seems to me that the best thing we can do for the younger kids is like making sure that their self-esteem is as high as it could be, and their understanding of consent, because I think that's a piece too. That's just what I've noticed in my own experience, is making sure that kids know as they get older what their worth is and what is significant. And I don't know if there's enough of that out there. Just in terms of who I am, who has gone through this, because all of the therapy afterwards during tends to be rewriting that narrative that you're worthy of whatever it is that you want, which is not to be.
And thank you so much for your presentation. So informative and very much moving forward.
Thank you.
We're here to resource. You know, please reach out with ideas.
Please send your deck to us. We'll send out lots of facts.
Again, just the drug awareness, and if you go, say hello to Lance Meyer. He was involved with this for X number of years when on the commission. May I have the motion to adjourn?
So those motions are.
All those in favor, aye? Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Dan, also thank you for the minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, I went back to the recording. It's not a skill trap. Nice to meet you. Thanks for thinking about it.
You know, right now, we're graduating about 70% of those students the first time.
I was on the.
And it's the feeling and casting. And so we're doing a lot of,
Right here, but it's not as, you know.
every 6 weeks, you have. Which is the
Right, yeah.
right number to have.
My mom's actually,
So that we
you
can
could
finish work.
great help you, but. even after-
Thank you so much. You are so awesome.
Great.
You're really good at talking about a lot of cool stuff.
Good there.
I turned in November 2019.